Sunday. Happy Sunday, y'all. It has been such a long time since I've gone live on this channel. But if this is your first time joining, my name is Tisha. It is a pleasure. It is a pleasure for you to be here. So I'm obviously sitting outside, so anything could happen, right? That's always the joy, right, of not only going live but doing so when you are amongst the elements, right? Because you get to see the divine in real time, right? Um, so this is something that has really been in my spirit to really share with you all for quite some time because I'm looking at some of the, I guess, arguments and things on social media really made me want to, as they say, enter the chat, right? And so if you probably came across this because something in the title resonated with you on whatever level, right? And so, it's crazy because we have these so many things that we deal with in society are based on ideological ideological differences, right? But one of the things that I've come to realize is how so many things boil back down to this concept of knowledge of self. Who or what is what we call God? What is this divine prime source creator? What is this? Right? And as you know, many wars, conflicts, whatever, have been started, stopped, continued for centuries on this very concept of what does it mean? What is God? What is God? Right? What does that mean? Thank y'all for having coffee with me, by the way. So, I enjoy my tea, but I also enjoy my coffee, and I had to accept that about myself. That's a whole nother story, y'all. So you see, I put a little cinnamon. You see, because I like it spicy. But anyway, and so like for some time I've been really doing this, during this self-reflection. As an ant crawls on my phone. See, anything can happen. So doing this self-reflection and really going and diving deep within myself and looking at all of these different patterns that I've noticed in my own life over time and what are the most consistent themes in my life. And one of the things that I came to realize about myself was, so let me back up. Um, Long story short, right? And I know it's a so I if y'all catching this, I listen. It's a lot, y'all. It's really is a lot to unpack because this is decades, decades that it took me to actually unpack this truth, my truth, right? So I didn't grow up very religious. And what I mean when I say that is, we weren't a household. We had Bibles on the table, like a lot of black households, right? So we had Bibles on the table, went to church on Easter, but it wasn't, this overly dogmatic household. I didn't grow up that way. Now, when I went to college, I was 18. Went to FAMU. Shout out to FAMU. Shout out to the Rattlers. Yes, indeed, to the HBCU. Anyway, so when I went to FAMU, I actually met the person that introduced me to the church. Rest in power, Theresa. Rest in power. And so she introduced me to a church, and I got baptized and spent, I don't know, maybe 12, 13 years, as a part of this church. And so in going to church, I went every Sunday. I grew in rank, if you may, in the church where, I, we studied the Bible every day. We studied the Bible, right? And really dug into the scriptures and things like that. And and so it got to a point where I started studying the Bible with other people and teaching other people how to read the Bible and apply it to their lives. And then I started leading a ministry, and then I started leading a sector. You know what I mean? Like, so I kept growing and growing and growing in my leadership abilities in the church. And and that was all fine and good, but there was some things in it. Greetings. Thank you for joining the live. There were some things in it that just didn't resonate with me, and I really won't delve into that because that's not really what this is about. But for me, one of the things, greetings everybody, thank you so much. And listen, wealthy, healthy, and prosperous rising to you all, thank you so much. And so there were some things in the church that just did not resonate with me. And but I continued because that's what I knew. You get what I'm saying? Like that. And I don't know about y'all, but please drop it in the chat, right? Just in terms of your upbringing and how you grew up, and some things for you. But it got to a point where it just wasn't really, it just wasn't resonating with me anymore. And eventually I left the church. And that was challenging because so many people, of course, are on different religious tracks and things like that, and most of them are based in Abrahamic religions that are based on what people know as the Bible, right? And that's all fine and good because I still refer to the Bible for certain things, but I'm just on a different mode at this point. And how I got there is because, like I said, one of the themes that I kept seeing in my life was just how I kept going back to this childhood pain, dealing with not having my father physically present. Shout out to the ancestors, thank you. But not having my father present in my life. And so I started to see different patterns in my life and different patterns in terms of my relationships, right? The sorts of things that I would tolerate in my relationships, the sort of relationships I would allow, right? The sort of men that I would gravitate to. And so I started noticing this pattern. And one of the things that I noticed at that point was these deep abandonment wounds, because like I said, I didn't grow well, I mean, I didn't say this, but I didn't grow up with my biological father, and I didn't actually meet my biological father. Rest in peace, Dad. Rest in peace. But I didn't meet my biological father until I was 13 years old. And you don't think about these things as a child, right? How these things will affect you when you get, as you start to mature and things like that. But specifically for my young girls who have dealt with things like childhood abandonment of your father. And I know that there's those who have had abandonment issues when it comes to their mothers, but I'm not here to speak on that because that's not my story. So that wouldn't be genuine to me because that's not my story. But what I can say is obviously, an absent parent for whatever reason certainly has a deep effect, physically and psychologically on a child, and developmentally, right? In all manner of ways. So, but for me, I started to notice these patterns in my relationships and how that not having my father physically present, they say that little girls look for their father in other men, right? And it's very, very true. And so I found myself in this pattern where I attracted, men who could not reciprocate, right? Who could not give me what it was that I needed to feel safe, to feel loved, to feel whole, if you may, right? Because that's a whole other thing that we'll get into. But I was attracting these relationships that really couldn't give me that. And they couldn't give me that because they didn't have that to give, right? But because of my own wounding, I couldn't see that. Now, how this relates to religion and my religious training and things like that was because, in traditional society, particularly in America where I am, it is a Christian nation, so to speak, right? And so we're talking about Abrahamic religion where God is seen as a paternal, male, masculine father energy, right? And one of the things that as I matured that I started to realize is that in that in that view of God, the reason that that was so challenging for me to really feel whole in that was one because I did not have my father there with me, which would be, my God, so to speak, my creator, so to speak. You see what I'm saying? I didn't have that, and that created this schism, right? And in that, it was difficult for me to see the divine within myself because the concept of God is always seen as masculine, paternal, something or someone that something to be feared, right? And that was always a challenge for me, specifically because the household, when I was younger, there was a lot of there was abuse in my household. So when we talk about these concepts, we of fear God, right? And for those of you that's your story and that's where you at, that's okay, right? That's it is what it is. But for me, that didn't resonate because I saw how growing up in a household where there was violence and and we're taught to look at a father as this God, and I'm not saying, and again, please take my intention is you hear what I'm saying and that it speaks to you for the truth, right? For the truth of what it is. And that you hear this from a place of truth and knowledge and awareness versus an unhealed space. So if this is resonating with you, I hope that you receive this. My intention is that you receive this from a healed space, right? And if you are in fact triggered by what I'm saying, I hope that you dive deeper into why you are triggered and really work on whatever that is. Because one of the things that I've come to realize is that when you feel triggered, right, it is because there is something aimed at you. So you feel like you have to respond. And that is your spirit speaking to you. And so allow that, dive into that if you feel called to, and heal whatever that is that's making you feel triggered, right? That's an opportunity for you to really dive into yourself. But for me, I came to realize that all of these abandonment wounds and all of these things, it I could not really reach the space within myself to heal these aspects of myself that were left by my father not being there, by not by having relationships that mirrored that abandonment wound, and simply to reflect and show me of what I needed to heal, where I was still unhealed, right? And so in having those relationships, one of the things that showed me is that I needed to learn to really incorporate, encapsulate, and encompass my own divinity. And so this is why the title of this video is How Embracing God as a Woman Helped Me to Heal. Because something that is not often spoken about, and we'll dive into this on another level, probably on my other channel that's called Hips and Gnosis. But I wanted to have this conversation with y'all. One, because I have the ability to go live here, but secondarily, because when we talk about healing, my company, Conscious Creations, I make products to help people to heal these different wounds and things like that. And I work with intuitive healing modalities and things like that. And that's available on my website at www.consciouscreations.live. But what I am saying is, it was just, as long as I embraced the concept, one, that the divine was outside of me, and two, that the divine was a man, so to speak, what I found was that I was constantly looking for the approval of men. And this is one of the things that is not really talked about when it comes to society, where women are taught to seek the approval and the attention of men, right? To really, let me say it this, what's coming to me and what's coming to me is whoring ourselves out for the attention of men, right? Because again, most of us, if not all of us, have done it at some point in our lives. And this is why I want to have this conversation, because so many of us, including myself at one point, were walking around or are walking around unhealed. And in part, it is because we are being called to embrace our own divinity, the truth of the divine within yourself, the divine as the goddess, the divine as the goddess, right? The divine as the birther of life. Because, it's interesting because with women being able to literally give birth to a whole being, to literally change lives by giving birth to an actual person, to carry a person inside yourself and give birth to that person, right? To nourish and nurture all of a person inside of you and to give birth, and then to not look at that as God, that's some spell work that's just is wild to me. Now that I look at it differently, that's a wild spell crafting, right? To get the creator, to the birther of worlds, to see herself as less than what she is. But it was all done for a purpose. It was all done for a purpose in order to control the energy of the feminine, to control the energy of the feminine, and to create a scenario to where you actually feel like you are wretched, right? And sinful, and your righteous acts are like filthy rags. All of these things, fear me. All of these things that we're taught through, at least through Christianity, which is what I can speak to because that's what I grew up in and that's what I grew up teaching to people, right? Um, and again, this is not to bash y'all who are Christians and claim to be Christians, and not at all. Again, this is my story of my truth, right? And so what I'm saying is, for me, that didn't work for the reasons that I said, because it did not allow me to heal, and in fact it exacerbated fatherhood wounds and abandonment wounds and feeling a lack of love and not being able to embrace the wholeness of myself, not being able to fully recognize myself as a divine creator being, someone who co-creates with the universe and is able to actually birth new realities, to actually speak and create realities. It took a long time for me to get to that place where I saw myself in that role, because I was busy ascribing all of that to something that was outside of me. And so now what I see when I look at that very energy, because if I'm looking at it from an energetic standpoint, what I see is so many things, so many narratives, so many things in society, including, the so-called government, right? You come to me for assistance. You come to me for help. You come to me for these things. What I say goes, and you come to me for what you need, right? It creates this. It creates this learned helplessness, right? That's a term that actually I learned in a criminal case. So y'all, if you so in my other life, I was an attorney for 13 years and I still am a licensed attorney. In addition, right? But I say that because, in the law, when you are asking for relief, and I made a post about this recently. In the law, when you're going to the court and you are requesting relief, the first thing you have to do is complain. You file a document that is called a complaint, right? So you complain. Then you make a plea. You plead, right? You're pleading with the court to do something in the document that you are filing. Along the course of the case, you file what is called motions. So you're literally you complain, you plead, you go through the motions, and when you file your motions, at the end of your motion, one of the things that you are asking for is a prayer for relief. So you're complaining, you're pleading, you're going through the motions, and you're praying to the court to do something for you, right? And one of the things that I've learned is that takes, shout out to the ancestors in the wind. Yes, indeed. Is you're literally, and this is what I tell my clients all the time, in going to the court, you are quite literally asking someone else to have power, dominion, and control. You have to give them jurisdiction. So when you file a complaint with the court, one of the first things you have to establish is that the court actually has the jurisdiction or the ability to speak, right? Diction. They have the ability to speak, the authority to speak over your situation, right? And in order for them to pass judgment on your situation, you must give them jurisdiction or be within the jurisdiction of the court to be able to do that. You see what I'm saying? So you have to you have to establish that someone else in fact does have jurisdiction over you in this matter. And so much of what humanity has been taught, so much of how humanity operates is giving other people power over decisions, many of which you have the actual authority to do for yourself. But in externalizing your power, either through law or religion or medicine or any of these things, it's please understand again where I'm coming from with this. What I'm saying is it's a learned helplessness. And this is actually that, and what I was saying before is that's a term that I learned through Dr. Lenore Walker. Shout out to you, Dr. Walker. I don't know if you'll ever see this, but Dr. Lenore Walker, she wrote a book called The Battered Spouse Syndrome. And that was a book that I ordered and I had to refer to in a legal case that I had regarding domestic violence and the impacts of domestic violence. So so when I started this conversation by talking about the ways that I grew up and the things that I saw and things like that, coming from a household where there was domestic violence and things like that, and then looking and then growing up in a country where so many people experience domestic violence on their own, on the soil in which they live, right? It's the same energy. I'm talking about energy. It's the same energy, right? And so it's no shock to me that our country touts itself on being a Christian nation, because when you're taught through religion to fear God, right? To that you are unworthy, all of these things. To a woman in particular, to a little girl, what I can say is that did something. That changed me. That very concept changed me. But it changed me, I would say, for the better, because it made me look inside myself and to see why that made me so uneasy. Why it made me so uneasy. And I'm not, and again, listen, our men are awesome. I know some amazing, brilliant, powerful, divine men. But what I am saying is for the little girls out there, for the little girls who grew up to be women, right? Who experienced abandonment issues, who experienced fatherlessness, who experienced abuse, who experienced these things that made it difficult for you to see the divinity within you. You are who I am speaking to. You are who I am speaking to. And if you are having difficulty actually tapping into your divine feminine energy, it may be because it is time for you to embrace your own divinity, to embrace the divine within you, right? Because it's time. It is time for you to come home to yourself, to come home to the truth that you are a divine creator and you were born to be that. That is a gift that you have, that you were born to be. But what happens is, and this is a whole other conversation that we will delve into at some point. But I want to keep this video shorter today. But we will delve into it again, more than likely, on the Hips and Gnosis podcast. We've only done one episode so far, but I intend, these are the types of conversations that I intend to have on the Hips and Gnosis podcast. But in talking about how the external reality is created based on what I look at as body politics, right? So it's really, everything is birthed from a womb. Everything. That's why it's called a, when you see it talk about the matrix, right? We're talking about a womb of creation, a seat, a portal of creation. And so because of that, the legal system, the politics, everything is based on a matrix, something that gave birth to this. But what happens is, because it was not based on divine energy, it was distorted, it's distorted. And so rather than it being a matrix or a mother that is nurturing and nourishing and everything like that, it is, you will obey me, you will fear me, or I will punish you, right? Regardless of what your will is, regardless of what it is that you divinely have a right to over your own being, over your own consciousness, if you don't obey me and do what I say, I will punish you in one way or another. That's what I'm saying. That is a distortion. That is a distortion. Because any of you who are mothers out there, any of you mothers, yes, sometimes your children need discipline, but you're not out here, most of you are not out here going out of your way to make your children be in fear of you and to just simply punish them for wanting to exist, right? Punish them for wanting to do normal things that life requires, right? So you're not out here distorting and fucking up their lives because you just want them to obey you. You want this power and control over them, right? Most mothers are not out here doing that, right? But in a false mother system, in a false matrix, right? That is what it looks like. Do you know what I mean? And so this is why so many of us have been called to heal those abandonment wounds, to heal those fatherhood wounds that some of us had, right? Because again, it goes deep, y'all. And this is why hips and gnosis. And that's hips, of course, and then gnosis, Gnosis. So the hipsandgnosis.com. This is why we will delve so deeply into such topics, because it is time for my sisters, for women, to walk back in your hips and gnosis. Walk back in your power, because your power, you have given your power. We all have, right? We've been trained to do that. You've given your power away to allow other beings to take your energy, your true divine energy, your true divine feminine essence, and to use it to create systems that lord and power over other people for the purposes of oppressing them for more power. Do you see what I'm saying? But you are that divine power that you are stepping into the remembrance of. And this is why I wanted to have this conversation today, because that absolutely was my story. Absolutely was my story. But I didn't recognize how my story was unfolding and what it meant until it did. Do you see what I'm saying? So as a child, all of the nights that, I had to wonder, was I going to get beaten? Was I going to be punished for something I didn't do? Whatever the case. Was I going to have to scrub walls because whatever? I remember this one night, and this is coming up to me, so maybe someone needs to hear this. But I must have been like 7 or 8, maybe. Maybe I was a little older than that. Maybe I was closer to like 10, because I'm thinking about where we lived at the time, and I was going to middle school. So maybe I was like 10, 11, 12, whatever. But one night, my stepdad, because I grew up with my mom and my stepdad, my brothers and sisters, And so my stepdad had gotten drunk, and he woke us all up in the middle of the night because there was chicken bone in the toilet. Now, mind you, I'm like between 11 and 11, 12. So what am I doing throwing chicken bones in the toilet? So he woke us all up and had us scrubbing walls because he wanted to know who had thrown the chicken bone in the toilet. So we were literally up in the middle of the night. My brothers and sisters, if I was 11, my brother must have been like 8, and my sister must have been like 5. Had us up in the middle of the night scrubbing walls and threatening to beat us because somebody had thrown a chicken bone in the toilet. And me, I'm thinking, I have to get up and go to school tomorrow. Why am I up in the middle of the night doing this? Do you see what I'm saying? But this was these types of things were reoccurring. You know what I mean? This wasn't a one-off. These were reoccurring. And so from that, it that taught me that it was difficult for me sometimes to sleep through the night because I always had to wonder what kind of foolishness was I going to wake up to? What was going to happen? So it kind of kept me on edge as a little girl. And children should not have to grow up that way. Children shouldn't have to grow up that way. But when you have situations where people are unhealed, because I was dealing with a stepfather who had his own demons, right? And though unfortunately he also had power and control over children and then impacting their minds. And so I'm gonna have to cut it here, y'all, because my battery is about to die. But we will have this conversation again. Go to www.consciouscreations.live if you need any tools for wellness on your journey. Pick that up. We'll pick this chat up again, because yeah, I'm at 1%, y'all. So all right, so I'm at 1%, y'all. So we're gonna pick this up again.